So this recording is focusing revision around English Literature Paper 2. On this paper you've got DNA, you've got the Love and Relationships poem, and section C is responding to unseen poetry. So what they ask you to do is they ask you to analyse one poem in detail. Now you won't have studied this poem in class, okay, that's why it's called unseen. You'll be very lucky if your teacher has managed to mind read and do some preparation with you and suddenly it appears. But in the experience of the last 7 years, we've never seen a poem on the paper that we've done in class. So you will very much come to it blind and you will do an analysis of it in the way that your teachers taught you. And then you've got a really short mini essay to write that's worth 8 marks. And it'll give you a second poem to look at, and you've got to compare the first poem with the second, but not comparing what they're about, but how they've been written. So all you do is you find a couple of similar methods that they've used or different methods, and you write about those. So if we think about the section as part 1, part 2, obviously part 1, where you respond to a poem in detail, is worth 24 marks. So this is the bit which is the most important part of this question. And like I said, you won't have seen it before, so you've got to have a strategy around how do you approach a poem that you don't have any prior knowledge of. Sometimes this can be really quite daunting for a student, and you've got to get over that and have a way in, because we often find that because you haven't seen the poem and had specific things told to you about the poem, you often write about things that are quite thoughtful, quite interesting and perceptive, so it actually allows you to score quite high marks. So one strategy that we would advocate is to read the poem, write down the gist of the poem. So what by gist we mean, like, generally what's it about? Is it about a boy who goes to school and gets bullied? Okay, that would be the gist of the poem. You then read the question and you highlight the focus. Now the focus of the question might be, how does the poet show the unhappiness of the boy? So you think, all right, okay, well this is about a child who's bullied, and I'll pick out some lines that show how unhappy he is. You then look at the language. You look whether there's a semantic field. You'll know about semantic fields, but there might not be one, yeah? And we're not saying that there's a set ingredients here. We always say, if all else fails, talk about the title. The title will be well-chosen language, yeah? Something like, I don't know, school days were the worst days of my life, you know, and you talk about the word worst and the connotations of that. Just there'll always be something to talk about. Repetition you often see in poetry, a shift in the tone, courses, similes, metaphors, yeah. It might be cyclical, yeah, but always looking for methods that you can write about, just like when you're doing language, paper 1, question 2. How does the writer use language? Always make choices that you can write about. Think about the structure of the poem as well, yeah? You know, you might feel really confident in your ability to talk about caesura or arrangement, and if you do, well, they will be there. So normally, you'd be looking at 3 detailed paragraphs to secure a grade 5 here. A little bit more development, a little bit more interesting choice of words, zooming in, understanding the whole theme and how the language has been chosen to fit that theme is likely to move you to a 7. The second bit, the 8 marker, 2 things happen with this. Either students run out of time or they write about what the poems are about. So they'll talk about how poem A is about bullying of a boy, whereas poem B is about the bullying of a girl. Poem A happens in a school, poem B happens in the park, and quite often than not they'll get 0 out of 8. And I've read answers that have written far too much and still got 0 out of 8 because they've dealt with the what and not the how. So the only thing they want to mark you on here is what we call AO2, which is an analysis of the methods used. So for example, poem A might use colour imagery like greys and blacks to show his unhappiness, Whereas poem B might use colours like blue and silver to show his excitement and anticipation. That would be a method. They both might use repetition to get an important idea across. They both might use enjambment, caesura, a simile, the colour gold, the setting of a field, just by finding 2 to 3 similarities or differences and talking about them in terms of both, whereas, will comfortably get you to a mark of 5 or 6 out of 8, which would really help you get grade 7+. So, this is what we do. 24 marker, analyse one poem in detail. How do you do that? Well, look at the significance of the title. What could it suggest? What's the poem about? The micro. So, for example, a boy being bullied. And what's the wider message? The macro. Yeah, this is about the difficulties faced by children when starting secondary school. So, micro to macro, micro to macro. Pick out about 3 lines that you can analyse and comment on the poem's structure. Just to reinforce these 2 ideas, they are often written about badly. So just to reinforce that enjambment is the running over of a sentence from one line to another. Most people can spot that. It's really easy to spot. However, you've got to be able to say why it's used. So is it to convey a sense of urgency, rising emotion, tension? Caesura, which is my favourite really, is where we see a slight pause in a line of poetry, normally mid-line. And it often happens after something quite shocking or dramatic or significant. Makes the reader pause and have to reflect on the importance of why there, why now. So this is an example of a part 1, the 24 marker. So you get a poem and you get a question. So you read the poem, okay, so the place is full. Another afternoon after a rotten day at school, hating this place, hating them, feeling like a fool, sweat on my fingers, pages dirty with smears, I stumbled up the street still swallowing my tears. Held my head high in pride, I walked on the hot concrete. I blinked out to the sunlight, exhausted from the heat. At the gate they stood. Same old looks, thinking I chose to stay. I looked back with disgust, shouted swear words and walked away. They called me freak, they yelled, and ran. It hurt, and I didn't understand. But I tried to keep it in as hard as I could. I didn't want to seem weak. And the anger started to build up. I thought I was right. Yeah, I was punished when I tried to make it stop. That's when I knew. Only I take care of myself, but don't get caught. More anger and more violence, no other choice. It was the place's fault. Time could not fix that. Nothing could make these wounds heal. That's just how they damage you. My innocence they did steal. There was nothing there for me, nothing I haven't had to learn, nothing I'd care to teach. A childhood lost with no return. So you read it and you think, right, okay. You read the question and the question gives you a clue about what it's about. So in the place's fault, how does the speaker present his negative feelings about his school days? So you take that question and you say to yourself, right, it's about somebody's negative feelings about school days. So all I've got to do now is go in and find the evidence. So on the micro, it's about the speaker's negative experience at school. The macro could be how bullying is something that many suffer at school and it can stay with them for the rest of their lives. So there's a sort of opening paragraph emerging. Now, because the question says negative feelings about school, that gives me a way in now. So I can look at that and think, right, where are words associated that are quite negative here? So you've got the repetition of hating this place, hating them. Yeah? A childhood lost with no return at the end. You've got the title, The Place's Fault. Very clear that he blames the school for allowing this kind of behaviour to take place. You've got some quite powerful caesura in the middle of it. Yeah. At the gate they stood, full stop. At the gate they stood. There's your caesura. It's a real dramatic point. That is the point of almost sort of rising tension. What is going to happen to this boy? They are waiting for him. Yeah. You've got swallowing my tears. Quite powerful imagery there. My innocence they did steal. Quite powerful imagery there. There's no right answer, remember. The beauty of English, as long as you can talk well, write well about what you want to say, you will do well. What you've not got to do is freak out and think, oh, I don't understand it. You'll never understand a poem completely, but because of the question, it will guide you in to find things that you want. So, lots of students in English struggle with structure and I don't know how to write it. How do I start? Okay. And, you know, even at grade 7 plus, you will have students who feel like this. So this is just a very, very straightforward way of attacking this question. So if you're going to have a go at this question, yeah, I'd aim for 2 sides of A4. I'd start off by talking about what the poem's about, micro, and its wider message. So it might go something like this. Arguably, school days are presented as frightening and disturbing by the speaker in the poem, The Place's Fault. However, I would also argue that the poem touches on the wider issues of bullying and the damage this can do to your future going forward. That gets you in. Then, in the second paragraph, I'd explore one of those ideas, maybe the swallowing my tears image or the innocence they stole, you know, that sense of personification there. Then I'd look at something else that's strong visually, even the repetition. Then I'd look at another one, and then I'd finish with something around the structure. I might talk about the fact that the poem is written in one continuous stanza, the idea that perhaps the bullying is never ending, there's no break in it. I might talk about that caesura from before. That'd give me enough. 3 strong language, 1 structure with some kind of intro. So it's an okay model to use that. It generally would get you to around that grade 7. You don't need to follow a model like that. Okay, this is a free writing piece really, but remember every poem generally focus on what's it about, wider meaning, effective language, effective structure. So, I have put that into an answer. That would pull into just the 7, yeah, a very methodical, quite a basic answer, but it does enough. It answers the question, yeah. You'd expect a lot more around that. On the one level it could mean this, on another level it could suggest. It doesn't go deep, this one. This is almost like one that I'd say to you, use as a starting point, but improve it, yeah. So look at it and think, oh God, right, okay, well that's one way, but maybe it could refer to that as well. In poetry it's really good to try and show 2 readings of the quotes that you choose. So let's have a look at part 2 now. So it'll ask you to read another poem, which we'll read in a minute, and it'll give you a question like this. So In My Parents Kept Me, poem B, which we've not read, and In the Place's Fault, poem A, both speakers write about their experience of bullying. That's what they're about. What are the similarities and or differences between the ways the poets present these experiences? And it's the ways which they assess you on, the methods. So you'll see there on the left you've got The Place's Fault, and then you've got this other poem called My Parents. Okay, so quick read of that. My parents kept me from children who were rough, who threw words like stones and wore torn clothes. Their thighs showed through rags as they ran in the street and climbed cliffs and stripped by the country streams. I feared more than tigers, their muscles like iron, their jerking hands and their knees tight on my arms. I feared the salt coarse pointing of those boys who copied my lisp behind me on the road. They were lithe, they sprang about behind hedges like dogs to bark at my world. They threw mud while I looked the other way, pretending to smile. I longed to forgive them, but they never smiled. Okay? Well, looking at them, you can see a difference. So you know they're both being bullied. You don't write about that. You choose 3 points of comparison. So by looking at them, one is written in verses, 3 stanzas. One is one continuous stanza. So I explain my rationale behind that. Okay. I can see, I know there's quite a bit of repetition in the place's fault. Another afternoon after a, hating this place, hating them. So I've got some repetition there. And I think I've seen some repetition in my parents. I can see I feared and I feared. So I could write about how both writers use repetition to get key messages across. Okay. I can see similes in my parents' poem. And I know there's a simile in the place's fault. Feeling like a fool. And then we've got muscles like iron. So I'm going to say both poems use similes, but for different effects. And I'll talk about them. It's a very silly question. Okay. It appears at the end. Like I say, it's done done by someone very well. Some can't do more than a paragraph because they're running out of time. All I would say is the first part of the question is 24 marks. This is 8. Even my maths tells me that 8 times 3 is 24. So the first bit of this answer, where you analyse one poem in detail, should be 3 times as long. More detail. Yeah, so this 8 marker, I don't know, I always say half to one side of A4. And it might look something like this. Both poets convey the trauma felt from bullying through similes. For example, in poem A, you can use poem A and poem B as well to cut down on the writing the titles out, okay? Poem A, feeling like a fool, blah, 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 blah. And poem B, through words like stones. Then both poems use repetition. Talk about that. I'm not going to read it all. That would get 5 out of 8, okay? If there was time, I'd do another paragraph. Right, so what I'm going to leave you with now are practice poems, okay? So I'm just going to talk you through these slides. I've explained how to do it. The best revision you can be doing now is reading as many unfamiliar poems and annotating them as you can. You don't need to do lots of practice answers. You read this poem called Island Man, then you look at the question, then annotate it. So we've got Island Man. Morning and the Island Man wakes up to the sound of blue surf in his head. The steady breaking and booming, wild seabirds and fishermen pulling out to sea. The sun surfacing defiantly from the east of his small emerald island. He always comes back, groggily, comes back to sands of a grey metallic soar, to surge of wheels, to dull north circular roar. Muffling, his crumple pillow waves, Island Man heaves himself, another London day. So I read it and I think, well, let's see a few bits and bobs. Let me have a look at the question. So it says, how does the poet present the speaker's feelings about his birthplace and its difference to London? Right, okay, so now I know that in the first bit of the poem, he feels really nostalgic about where he grew up. Sounds like the Caribbean, the sound of the blue surf. Yeah, the breaking and the booming of the waves, the sun, the Emerald Island. Lots of positive language and images. And then, of course, he feels very different about London. He describes it as grey, dull. He has to heave himself up. Another London day. The title unlocks the poem. Then you'd have the 8 marker. Both Island Man and Home explore the important role that homes play in people's lives. What similarities and differences in the ways the poets explore feelings. So we have the second poem. Home is pictures of memories on the wall. Home is sleeping in my own bed. Home is waking up to the smell of mum's cooking. Home is sharing the holidays with family. Home is playing the piano in the living room. Home is a warm place to be. Home is sweet. Home is the place for me. Home is filled with love. Home is blessed from heaven above. Home is where my heart is. Home has a strong foundation. It can weather any storm. Home is where I belong. When I go away, I know I can come back to stay. Home is a beautiful place. So you go back and you think, right, okay, so we know that both of them are written in one continuous stanza. So there's something you can compare because that's a method. There's a lot of repetition in this poem, so look for some repetition in both. Possibly something else that you can see. Colour imagery often appears. There's any mention of colours or the senses. Then you're going to see that I've teamed two up together on Blackpool. So you've got a poem about Blackpool there. In Blackpool, how does the poet present the wonder of the town? So you know by the wonder of the town, you're looking for all the positivity. You'd write about that poem first, then there's the comparison one. You know there, the question says, both of them offer a positive view. Compare the similarities and differences between Brighton and Blackpool. So again, you'd find three ways they're similar and or different, but only on methods. And then finally, I've left you with one to practice with, my favourite poem of all time. It's a poem called November by Simon Armitage, and it focuses on the pain and the honesty of how difficult it is to care for people when they're old. It's very, very harsh language, very interesting use of language that. And then we would compare that with a poem, again, that focuses on the effects of old age. Okay, so there is a lot there for you to work through. My advice to you is go back to the beginning of the recording when I tell you how to do it. Look at the way you do it and then choose either the old age theme or the home theme or the Blackpool Brighton theme and have a go at a couple of answers. More than happy for you to pass them over and for me to mark them for you. Hope that's been helpful.